Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the very first interview on the channel ever. I am here with one of the best composers on LittleBigPlanet, Kenneth Young. I just got to say, I really got into LittleBigPlanet during LittleBigPlanet 2, and LittleBigPlanet 1 is really what started, it all for the channel. And most people nowadays know you from the songs that you composed for LittleBigPlanet 1. And some more recent titles like the Astrobot games. So you've made some really memorable songs like the Gardens in Music and Disco Continue that have changed lives. I know mine did. But yeah, tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm from Scotland, and when I was working at Media Molecule, I was obviously living down in Guildford, but I moved back to Scotland in 2020 during the pandemic. So I'm back home now with my family. And I've been working in games now since 2004. My first job was at Sony's London studio as a junior sound designer, and I was there for about 4 years. Sort of worked my way up to plain vanilla sound designer, and then that's when I went to join Media Molecule in 2007. So I guess Media Molecule was about a year in at that point. And so when was that? That was like May, June 2007. And we shipped LittleBigPlanet like 18 months later.
Oh, wow.
And then, so I left Media Molecule 2015 after working on LittleBigPlanet 1 and 2, a whole bunch of the DLC, obviously, Tearaway. And I was also on Dreams for the first sort of 4 years. I guess you could call that like its pre-production period. And I left 2015 to go freelance. I stayed on as a contractor for a few months to ship Tearaway Unfolded. And then since then I've worked on a bunch of indie games, some VR stuff, some console stuff. And I started working with Team Asobi, the folks out in Japan that make the Astrobot games, in 2017, 2018 on their first big game, which was Astrobot Rescue Mission for PlayStation VR. And then Astro's Playroom, which was the packing game for PlayStation 5, which was really cool. And then, most recently Astrobot, which has been going great guns and has really found an audience, and people have been enjoying it. So that's been cool. I think I remember when I worked on LittleBigPlanet thinking that my career had probably peaked and it would be downhill from there. So it's really nice for that not to be the case and to still be working on stuff that, and it's cool that I'm still working with PlayStation as well. That's nice that I've still got that relationship. And so that's kind of a career summary. I don't know if it tells you much about who I am, but just sort of give you an overview of what my life in games so far.
Right. So you've worked with a variety of studios over the years. Media Molecule, especially with LittleBigPlanet. You thought it was the peak, and then you ended up, doing all this stuff again with Astrobot and all these other more sort of recent titles that have come over in the past decade. And it's really fascinating to hear about that because it's like some people will say, oh yeah, you should only be known for this one specific game or this one specific title, but really it's great to have a breadth and depth, right, to extend yourself to multiple different areas.
Absolutely. I mean, you could say I've sort of done the opposite in the sense that I'm definitely seem to have specialized in the niche of family-friendly platforming games. There's a lot of similarities in many ways between aspects of Astrobot and LittleBigPlanet in that regard. Very different in other ways, but just things like, it's a platforming game. It's not Astrobot's not 2.5D, but it's still in that same, I think it's the same kind of family-friendly market that it's tapping into and trying to appeal to people of all ages, but obviously it's meant to be accessible to children. And it's maybe that's inevitable once you work on something that makes as big an impact as LittleBigPlanet did. Then I guess that is sort of a marquee title on my resume, and when people are In fact, there's a direct link there between working on Little Big Planet and working on Astrobot, insofar as
Right.
Nicholas Doucet, the director of Astrobot, he was. We'd never worked together. We worked in. Both were working at Sony London studio. As I said, that was my first job in industry, sort of in the middle of the PlayStation 2 era, getting into the early PlayStation 3 time. And Nico worked there too. He was working on a bunch of iToy AR sort of. We didn't call it AR at the time, but they were just iToy games, which was like this webcam accessory for PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3. Or was it called the PlayStation Eye and PS3? I forget. Anyway, so he specialized in those. I worked on a few of those too, but they weren't the ones that. There was a whole bunch of those that we made at London Studio, and so although I worked on iToy stuff too, it wasn't the projects that Nico was on. But we kind of knew each other and we kept in touch after I left. And so when he'd moved out to Japan and had set up Team Asobi, and was thinking about when they were working on Astrobot Rescue Mission, their first few projects were the Playroom for PlayStation 4 and then Playroom VR for PlayStation VR. They were little collections of prototypes, really. And when they made the first big game, which was Astrobot Rescue Mission for PlayStation VR, he was thinking about what the music experience should be and was wondering about whether it should have a licensed soundtrack. And so he originally reached out to me to ask me, because of my experience of helping to put together the licensed soundtrack for Little Big Planet, certainly from a creative point of view. I wasn't involved in the actual licensing and the deal negotiation and all that. Someone else's job, specialist. But yeah, he was picking my brains about that whole process and how long it takes and how much it costs and what's involved. And that was just me helping out as like a industry workmate who was part of the Sony furniture and could answer those questions for him about him worrying about. It was under friend DA, I guess. Yeah, so like that he would never have got in touch with me to ask me those questions if it were not for the fact that I'd worked on Little Big Planet and had that experience. So yeah, there's a direct link there. So that helps to explain why I'm still working in family-friendly platforming games. It's like once you're known for that, it persists,
right?
Which is good. I really enjoy working in those kind of games. I think for the longest time I didn't really think of myself as a composer because, well, I wasn't. I got into the industry as a sound designer, and even when I joined Media Molecule, I was hired to run the audio department. I wasn't hired to write music. That's just something that, I mean, I had a background in music. I was a musician. I learned violin and studied traditional Scottish and folk music when I was a kid, and played a bit of guitar. But I'd never pursued composition. It wasn't something that I wasn't trying to be a composer. Excuse me. And yeah, once I was at Media Molecule, I then just ended up doing a few bits and pieces, and over time started doing more and more music because people seemed to like it, which was sort of a surprise, because when I was writing music initially, it was always just like what I had always considered to be temp assets. It wasn't ever written with the intention of it being actually used in the game. It was always written for like trade shows when we were showing the game off, and like the team had added new features, but we maybe hadn't got the contract sorted out with Matt Clark, who was the main composer on Little Big Planet 1. And then all of a sudden people were like, oh, that's great, so why don't you just write a full version of that? We put it in, and then I think the only bit of music that I really wrote with the intent of it being for the game and being used in the game, even if it was like a test initially, was the menu music for LBP1. And wow. Partly that was, it's not like that absolutely was not the first bit of music I wrote. I probably wrote, I'm trying to remember the name of the disco track. Is that Disco Continued? Is the sort of Disco 1 and LBP1?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, because I was getting mixed up with Disco Schmisco because you mentioned that in the intro there. But that was from LBP2, isn't it? Yeah. It's a bit more electronic in nature. But so I'd written a few things. I think maybe also the Skipping Sirtaki, and I forget the name of the desert one, sort of the ambient.
Is it New Delhi Dawn?
No, that's the Indian one. Yeah. So I think that one was a bit later as well. I remember writing New Delhi Dawn with, I think at that point I was like, okay, it looks like I'm writing music for this game as well.
Right.
Whereas, yeah, there was an ambient one with, that's in, I think maybe one of the sort of desert levels, Mexican levels. That's
Saragama Sun, was it that one?
Yes, that's the chap. Yeah. So I think I'd written a few of those slightly shorter ones, slightly simpler ones, and then I remember when I was writing Skipping Sirtaki being a bit like, okay, this is a bit. That was a very specific thing because the piece had to like speed up,
right?
To fit this one level that was being used in, and that's the thing is like. These were smaller levels. They weren't like main path levels. They were the little small levels off the side of the main path. And the music that was in the main path was always going to be a mixture of the licensed tracks and Matt Clark's interactive music tracks. So these side levels were viewed as, not as critical. So it was a lot easier sort of psychologically for me to be like, okay, I'll write a bit of music for that. Because something like Skipping Sirtaki was really only going to be used in one level. And it felt in a way like a waste of budget to have our like main composer writing a bit of music just for that, because that would be a lot more expensive than just me doing it for free. Even though I'm getting paid a salary, but it's like
right.
At that age, not very much. And so I just ended up writing more and more music. And then when I got to the menu music in LittleBigPlanet 1, I remember thinking, I want to do this because I knew that getting the tone of that right was going to be quite hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had a sense of what it should feel like. I don't even know how to articulate that because it was a combination of the fact knowing that this was the bit of music that was probably going to be heard the most out of everything that was going to be in the game, because you would the way that the flow worked is you boot the game up, you're in the pod, and then you go to the craft world and you select levels, you go to the moon, and like you're always going through that bit of music, and so it had to be sort of pitched just right so that it wouldn't be too annoying and all this. And so I just felt like I should have a go at that at least first, so that I could try out some ideas, and at the very least it would, even if what I did didn't work, I would at least then actually have a much better idea of what doesn't work, which is always useful when you're trying to sort of come up with the direction.
Right.
But what I did work, so we kept it. And I think in some sort of ways that's my favorite bit of music in the game, just because I think that was quite a hard one to get right, and I was pleased with how it ended up. But then there's the track, like you mentioned, the gardens as well in the intro, which is I think that's probably the fan favorite from LittleBigPlanet 1. It's a great bit of music, but that was mainly written by Matt, but I helped out on some of the additional parts. Like there's one of the stems is a string part, I did that. The synth part that's mine, little, and then there's various other little things that I added. So I was kind of more producer on that track, really. But if it wasn't an interactive track, I don't know if I would have. I probably would be. It would be fair to say I was a producer on that than one of the composers. But because you can isolate it, it feels like, well, everything in that stem is mine. So I guess I am one of the composers in there. But I can't even remember what the question you asked me was now. I'm just ranting about unlocking memories from my time at Media Molecule. But
right. Well, no, that's great, because it actually answers a couple of our other questions that we were going to ask you here. So there you go. No, it's great. It's great. And honestly, I think it's important to, sift back through memories in just an organic way. I feel like a lot of times, people do interviews and it's all serious, like, oh, you have to, keep in, to one little length all the time. But no, I think
I am
it's
not a serious person, so it's all
right. Well, nor am I in a lot of ways. So
Excellent.
We're quite similar there. So let's see here. So one of the things that I think certain people might know about is the old studio at Media Molecule.
Yes.
Some of you guys were saying that like the building was falling apart in places. How was that there when you were working on the game? And did you ever drink like the Coronas in the fridge or anything? I'm just saying this because in
Oh,
one of the
you can be
tours they
sure of
opened up.
that. Yeah, it's funny that, I mean, Media Molecule were not, I mean, they were called Media Molecule, but, this was obviously before the game had come out. And I guess the thing about that project was that, I'll get back to the building in a second, but,
Yeah.
like when, so I mean, the first, delete. Delete that or not. I really don't care. But the thing about the company at that time was, even though the game hadn't come out yet, there was quite a lot of hype around Little Big Planet, and that's tied into why I joined the company. I didn't join them for the hype, but I, like a lot of people, the first time I saw Little Big Planet was this. Actually, that's also, there's so many rabbit holes to go down here. It's crazy. But the first time that I saw Little Big Planet and I knew what it was when it was announced, that the GC announcement in March 2007. And it just looked so cool. And I was like, I really want to work on that. And I was just thought it was amazing. And I really got it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was like, I know what that needs. I know what the audio experience should be. It'd be wrong to say I knew what it needed to sound like, but I did have an affinity with its visual aesthetic in terms of, it looked a bit like a 1970s or 80s kids TV show almost. And at the time, the graphics engine was really pretty impressive. PlayStation 3 had been out for a few years at that point, a couple of years, I think. But it was really one of those first games that you were just like, oh wow, this is something a little bit different and clearly a little bit special. So yeah, I was really keen to apply for that job. And I'd actually seen the job previously, I think because I was at Sony and I was looking to leave. My time there had just run its course. It was my first job in the industry and it was an amazing first job. But I was the main reason I left really was I was working on too many projects at the same time. I was working on like 3 or 4 things. And that's not really what I wanted from my work. I wanted to like go deep on a project and collaborate with the team, not just like, be busy spinning plates on a bunch of different projects and not really doing a great job on any of them as a result of being spread a little bit too thin. So it's the main reason I left, because otherwise it was an amazing place to work. And yeah, London studio sadly was shut down last year, so that cut deep. But yeah, the Little Big Planet just looked amazing, and from the moment it was announced, it had this sort of hype behind it. So although I'd seen the job advert for Media Molecule, I was like, well, I'd never heard of them because they hadn't done anything.
Right.
And although I'd played some of the games that some of the people who were founders of the company had worked on, that to me, like, I'm not actually that's not impressive. It's like, it's amazing that there's a mixture of people from Bullfrog and Criterion. It's not, that's not impressive, but like, I don't personally look at a new company and it says people who from the makers of blah. I like, that doesn't really mean anything, because just because you worked on something, it means you worked on it, but it doesn't mean that the next game you make is going to be any good. Like, so there's no relationship between those two things for me. So I never really put much sort of truck in that. So yeah, basically Media Molecule were just this unknown random developer. They had a cool website. I remember that. It was full of what at the time I wouldn't have known was like Rex Crowell's artwork, with cool, probably at that time Flash animations or something. And it was just like pretty cool. And I remember like, oh, this is interesting. Like, they're clearly an interesting company, but like no idea what they're working on. They hadn't announced the game yet, so they couldn't sort of show you what the game was. Right. And I was like, well, Guildford, whatever, no thanks. And sort of brushed it off. But then when the game was announced, I remember like, oh, that's that company. Wow, okay, interesting. And applied and got the job, which was great. But one other little random story before I get back to talking about the building. I had actually seen a little bit of Little Big Planet before it was announced, but I just didn't know what it was at the time. When I was working, so as I alluded to, I was just like really busy and working on too much stuff in that job at Sony's London studio. It was a centralized audio department, which is why I was working on so much stuff. And we also did a bunch of work for other Sony studios because we were in Soho in London, which is traditionally just like very media centric, lots of film post-production houses and stuff like that, and a lot of recording studios.
Right.
We would always I would did a lot of voice recording and editing and a bit of directing as well for third parties and second party studios.
Yeah.
So I remember someone from, actually it was a chap called Mike who'd come down from the Liverpool studio, and Liverpool is where XDev are based. XDev are the external development, are like third-party relations at Sony, and at least that's what it's called in Europe. And because they're based in Liverpool and they were working with Media Molecule, they're effectively Media Molecule's publishers, that team at XDev.
Yeah.
They were in touch with Mike, who was a sound designer at the Liverpool Sony studio, and they tasked him with helping Media Molecule with doing some sound for a trailer or something like that. And it wasn't a trailer that ever got released. It was just like maybe a little internal video to explain stuff to people at Sony or something like that. And Mike had been tasked with doing the sound for that. And I remember him not being too confident about what to do, because Mike's at that point, Mike's a great sound designer, very experienced, but at that point he'd basically been working on Formula One racing games for a good number of years. And so looking at this video of like Sackboy jumping about on like this sponge world, he was a bit like, what the hell do I do with this? And I remember looking at it and going, it looks pretty cool. And it's kind of thing where, I would have actually enjoyed doing that. But I didn't know what it was. It was just some random video that Mike had that he was freaking out about. And so that was LittleBigPlanet. But I didn't know it at the time. And so, yeah, I'd actually seen the game, or maybe it was a previs of the game rather than actually a game capture. But so I'd seen that, and I'd seen the company's website. So I'd probably had more exposure to LittleBigPlanet than obviously anyone outside of Sony. I just didn't know it yet, which is apropos of nothing, but I just thought I'd throw that in there. That it's weird how your paths cross with these things, and then I ended up actually working on it.
That's amazing.
So first time I was in the building was obviously for my job interview, and yeah, it was. So like it was quite an odd place to find, because it was above what we jokingly always refer to as the toilet shop, which isn't really fair because it was a bathroom showroom. So it wasn't a very attractive building. It was just looked like a 1980s brick building, and the bottom was this bathroom showroom. So you could go in and see baths and tiles. It was that kind of business, and there was an office space above it, which was where Media Molecule were. And so you went down this little grubby alley to the side on the way to the car park, and then there was a little door up this very narrow flight of stairs up to the top of the building, the first floor. And above, sorry, it's just funny. Above the door, and other people have heard this story before because we love to talk about it because it's just ridiculous. But above the door was one of the toilets, which was next to the kitchen upstairs and the eating area where we had our lunch and stuff. And the toilet had the toilet pipe basically just came out, and it was directly above the door that we had to go through. And there were incidents where it was just like leaking shit directly onto people as they went through the front door. And I think that maybe only happened once, but and that, to be fair, that kind of plumbing incident can happen in any building, but something about the fact that it was this shitty looking building that we called the toilet shop, and it was leaking shit on the front door. It helps to paint a picture about a little bit how crummy the office was. And I've got millions of memories about the place I could talk about, but another sort of notable incident was the time that we were pretty sure it was our fault that the local electricity substation blew up, because we had as you can imagine, this was like, yeah, not an ancient office, but it was, it wasn't cut out to have people who on every single power socket were like plugging in, multiple computers and dev kits and monitors and and yeah, there was a day where just like, yeah, the electricity substation near the building just popped.
Wow.
And on the plus side, it got upgraded and then we didn't have any problems after that. But I remember our electricity bills were horrendous. And I just remember Siobhan being like, yeah, I'll not say what I was about to say. But like, we weren't entirely sure if we were getting diddled or not with the amount of money it was costing because it was so expensive. But then at the same time, you must have been burning through a lot of electricity. So, yeah.
Oh, wow.
I can't remember the name of the building because I was going to say Way House, but I think that's actually Media Molecule's current office. Yeah, I can't. And it's been knocked down. That building's gone now, the old one. It's been replaced by a very similar sized, but ultimately more modern building. I don't know if there's any game developers in it. That would be interesting to know.
It sure would, but at least they knocked down that, that old bag, with all the problems.
I don't know. It's like, I remember when part of the deal when Sony bought the company was that we got to move into the nice big, at what the time was big new office. I remember we had these conversations where we're like, I know it's really shitty, but it's kind of where the magic happened. So, do you think when we move to this slightly slicker, more corporate office, we're going to lose a little bit of the Media Molecule magic? And I don't think, that was of material difference. But of course, yeah, there's just so many happy memories about the time in the old the office above the toilet shop, because it is where we made that game, and that's
Right.
yeah, I get emotional thinking about it because it's it was a very, very happy time, and yeah, it's good stuff.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's always great when you work at a place, or you do work for people in a certain environment, and you just you remember everything about it. You remember the smells, the sights, the just the auditory experiences, and you take
Absolutely.
it with you.
Yeah,
it's just so great.
I can't remember exactly when it was before we left, but it was maybe like the weekend before or a few days before we actually moved out the office. I walked around it and just took shitloads of pictures, and I've still got them. But just of everything, of like every room, of like everyone's desks.
Yeah.
A little bit stalkery, but at the same time, I was like, I'm just going to, I'm just going to capture this because we're all going to be out here, in a few days, and I just wanted to sort of get it in there.
Yeah.
I've not looked at those for years, and it's one of those weird things. It's not the kind of thing that I could actually share because it's probably full of confidential stuff. But yeah, it's nice to have that. I'll need to have a little trip down memory lane one day and take a look at them. But what's mad is there's probably, I'm sure you could use tech now to stitch all those together and probably create like a 3D
Right.
an approximation of the office, which would be pretty cool. Maybe one day.
Well, you could sure have me do that. I've done it.
Yes,
done that before.
I know a man for the job.
Well, there we go. Right. It's amazing to hear that. And about things that you've worked on that have just given you that sense of closeness. Let's talk about favorites a little bit. If you even have any, what is your favorite Little Big Planet game out of the entire franchise?
Oh, definitely one. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
Because I think, like sequels are, from a like creator perspective, are always a little bit weird.
Right.
Because from my perspective, Little Big Planet 1 and 2 in some ways were actually just the same project because, and I don't mean that because they're obviously two different projects. I just mean as a development experience because, and this won't be true for everyone in the company because everyone had different roles and it's maybe quite specific to working in audio. But I worked on Little Big Planet 1, went straight onto DLC, and then straight from DLC onto Little Big Planet 2. And so that was all just one continuous experience. There was no like break there.
Right.
It's one of the reasons I think we actually, I mean, I don't speak for the company or anyone else, but like my feeling was very much like when we got to the end of LittleBigPlanet 2 and a bunch more DLC on that, although we started to hand over at that point to some other companies to help with the DLC before we sort of handed over the franchise, if you like. I remember like we were all absolutely knackered because we'd just been working our nuts off for years at that point, and
Right.
all focused on LittleBigPlanet, and nothing to do with, you know, it's not like we grew to hate it or anything like that. It was, but we were creatively like pretty drained working on LittleBigPlanet exclusively so intensely for such a long period of time. The thought of working on something else was really attractive. But yeah, LittleBigPlanet 2 for me, I didn't really enjoy that one as much as LBP 1. Like LittleBigPlanet 1 was harder in many respects because it was, we're like making the thing and making it out of nothing, like any
Right.
you know new game. That's a challenge, but that's creatively very satisfying to do that, and to solve those problems and get it all working. And yeah, I really enjoyed that process. It was the most enjoyable development process I'd ever had up to that point in my career. And yeah, it's up there. I don't know if it's been surpassed, but like I've had other good experiences. But yeah, LittleBigPlanet 1 was just a really great development experience. A lot of hard work, but I was also a lot younger and had more energy than I do now. You know, like I was, what age was I when I joined Media Molecule? I would have been 26, I guess. And yeah, shipped it when I was, 28. So I'm still pretty young, really. And when I joined, like I say, I only had maybe like 4 years industry experience when I started Media Molecule. So I wasn't like, it wasn't like my first rodeo, but at the same time, I wasn't like super experienced. And yeah, LittleBigPlanet 2, it felt like there was it kind of got off to a bad start for me in the sense that I didn't like some of the changes that were made, and largely just because it created some work that I just didn't want to do. I was like, oh, this is bullshit.
Right.
Very specifically, I can remember being really pissed off about the fact that so in LittleBigPlanet 1, I always loved that when you change the backgrounds, you got this really cool like whoosh,
Right.
swish. So visually, it was really nice. And then orally, it was really nice too, because we had this like nice wind sound to like score that movement. And I just found that very satisfying and very pleasing. LittleBigPlanet 2, because they, for really, literally for no good reason, just because the rationale was something like, okay, this is the sequel, we need to make it better, so we're going to change stuff to make it better. And some of the stuff they changed absolutely made it better, no question. But some of the stuff they changed, it was just being changed for the sake of changing it.
Yeah.
To make it look different. It's like, this is a different game. If it doesn't change, people will just be like, wait a minute, this is just LittleBigPlanet 1, you've conned us. So there's a real sense of needing to change stuff in order to make it feel different, so people can feel more comfortable about their purchase decision when buying a sequel, which from a commercial point of view, I completely get.
Yeah.
But actually, the right way to do that is to change stuff that makes it better, that actually makes it better. And I think that whole, and this is a really small little tiny, but like, I'm very anally retentive, so I'm still not over it, and still cross about it.
Right.
The change, and I can't even remember what the change was for the switching of the backgrounds, but it wasn't as slick, and that sound didn't work the same way anymore. And I just remember being like, but the reason it had to happen was because I think the backgrounds had more, were graphically more intensive. Like there was more going on in the backgrounds, and the big change was the backgrounds were animated. So not only did this transition not work anymore, and it went from being so cool to just being okay, but frankly just a little bit shit in comparison. But because we made the backgrounds animated, all of a sudden that meant that the backgrounds needed to have like additional audio work to score the animations. But also that's completely pointless work, because in LittleBigPlanet you build in front of the background. So then we had to solve this problem and create this tech where we would detect if you'd built in front of it, so we could turn the sound off that you'd built in front of. And it was all just like an exercise in pain and complexity that was, from my point of view, Like, I don't have any problem doing additional work when it's needed, but when it's additional work that I feel is actually making the experience worse, I just remember being like, yeah, I'm not into this. And it's not like that represents what the entire project was like, because actually it was still, you know, great company, great project. But yeah, that I remember that having that feeling early on where I was like, yeah, I'm not as into this. Like, you know, it just sort of set me off on the wrong sort of foot, if you like, at the beginning of working in the project. And I don't think I've got any other examples. So I clearly just am not over that,
Right.
that very specific example. But in a way, and there's other little things too, which are more about maybe the conceptual side of things. Like the first LittleBigPlanet game, the high level direction is it's like a journey around the world, which is, you know, very simple, but there's a lot of nice things you can get out of a very clear, simple concept like that. The second game's concept is a little bit more. So first of all, it has to be different because we can't just do the same thing again. If there is a high level concept for that game, it's something more a bit like it's a journey through science, through the ages, or something like that. So you've got like the Da Vinci stuff, which is, you know, Renaissance, and you go through like there's like a maybe like near future, more clinical, futuristic sci-fi thing, and then there's like Victoria's lab, which is more like Victorian industrial revolution. There's the Clive's, you know, Factory of a Better Tomorrow, which is the sort of Soviet kind of era stuff. And so there's these different sort of historical places and stuff, and that's cool, but it's just not, it's a little bit fuzzier. It's not quite as it's interesting, but it's conceptually not as simple and as clear. And I'm quite a sort of conceptual thinker, and so I remember just also being a bit like it's just not quite doesn't quite click. It's not quite as nicely, it's not as pure as LittleBigPlanet 1. And so overall, the sort of way I feel about the project, and I have to say, like, I think the game is great. I think it, you know, I love the levels. I think as a player experience, it's wonderful, and the game looks and sounds great. So I'm still really proud of it. It's just from a development point of view, I remember my overall feeling was one of just slight dissatisfaction with LittleBigPlanet 2. And that, like I say, that won't be representative of everyone in the team. That's just the way I feel about it.
Right.
And so, yeah, so for that reason, that when I say LittleBigPlanet 1 is my favorite, it's not, largely it is because it's the first, but also, yeah, I just have that sort of slight sort of tense feeling when I think about LittleBigPlanet 2, where it just didn't quite click for me, and I found it a little bit more painful to make that game. And then the last thing I'll say is that most of the way through developing that, it was the other thing that annoyed me a lot about it was, like, we were making all these changes to the game, some of which I viewed to be not particularly adding much to it and were arguably unnecessary, but we had failed to add a music sequencer, which if there was one thing LittleBigPlanet 1 really needed, and obviously I'm audio-centric, so I would say this, but I really feel like it was probably the biggest missing feature from LittleBigPlanet 1 was the inability to do any of your own kind of audio at all. Like, it was all just what I and the other folks that I'd hired had put together that you could work with. You couldn't record any of your own, or like, you know, do your own music and stuff like that. So that was clearly, like, would be a massive upgrade, a lot of work, right? But like something that was just necessary and would have really added a lot to LittleBigPlanet. And quite late in the day, we still didn't have that, and I was really pissed off about this because I'd done all this work that I wasn't that into, and I was like, well, we're doing all this shit, why aren't we doing the stuff we actually need to do? And so I remember being really quite angry, and I think I threatened to quit.
Oh, really?
That's how pissed off I was. And I don't know if that made me feel better. I don't know if it made any difference, but it's certainly, you know, like, you can't be doing that kind of thing every couple of weeks because people are just like, oh, Kenny's quitting again. But there was only, you know, once or twice that I guess it was 3 strikes. You're right. I can remember 2 occasions where I was like, if we don't do this, I'm out of here. And then the third time I was like, all right, okay. So I did leave the company. So, you know, it's good to have, you know, to be disciplined and have your principles to stick to. But we did get a sequencer. But another reason we got that was because firstly, I got a couple of weeks of Alex Evans' time for him to work with me, and we prototyped the UI for the sequencer initially on a like a PC prototype with Alex, and he did on a PC all the code for like what was the music sequencer like engine, if you like.
Yep.
And then it was a case of getting that to work on the PlayStation 3. And Matt ported over the audio code for the sequencer, but then the real difficult thing was actually getting the UI, and not just because we designed it, so taking that and putting it on the PlayStation 3 wasn't the challenge. It was how to do that within the world of LittleBigPlanet, and thinking about how to control that with the
DualShock 3. Yeah.
Thank you, DualShock 3. And the other thing, and the reality is that the only reason it happened was that the designers had been doing all kind of horrendous circuit board shenanigans for the cutscenes. There was no sequencer timeline for doing cutscenes. It was all be done with like timers, and it was like just a mess, and you couldn't tell what it was from looking at it. Even the people who'd built the levels were like, I don't know how this works anymore. So there was a very clear need for a timeline sequencer for just to get like that kind of linear sequencing stuff for the cutscenes that the team had been making. And because of that need, and that wasn't there for most of LittleBigPlanet 2, so it was just like a real dumpster fire. So Dave Smith, bless him, he created the timeline, and doing that work. And it's one of the good things is that he knew he had to make it work for the circuit boards, but also work for the music sequencer, and so he was able to tackle those both at the same time, which is it's the optimal way of doing these things. I'm sure you know, if you could do one thing, and then after you've done it, you go, oh, it would have been great if I'd known I also need to do this at the beginning, and then you have to go back and refactor your code and da. But Dave was able to get all that working from and it was a bunch of work, and it was one of those things, there wasn't actually time to do it, but we sort of made time for it, and Siobhan sort of wrangled the schedule to do it. And actually that game was meant to ship for Christmas 2009, but we didn't hit our dates. I remember the conversation where Siobhan, there was a team meeting, and it was everyone in the company there, and they're like, are we going to do this? Are we going to ship this game? Because it's not ready. It's going to be a bit rough and ready. It's not. It's going to be very, very difficult to hit that date in time for Christmas. And then we decided to delay it for it to come out. I think we came out in January 2010. I think I'm right in saying. I can't quite remember exactly. But that was a very difficult decision to make, because missing that Christmas market for a family-friendly game was not broken promises and all that. But I remember, I think it was the right thing to do, because if we'd shipped that thing, it would have been a hot mess.
Right. I think you guys had scheduled to release it in November of 2010, but it was actually delayed in January of 2011.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I got my years out by one, but yeah, that sounds about right. So
right.
I like, but all those things, that little bit of extra time meant that some of those last minute things like the the music sequencer could get a little bit more time in QA and a bit more battle tested. So like I say, I've got a lot of affection for LittleBigPlanet 2 as well, but there was just a little bit more like sort of pain in shipping that one. So I don't think of it as fondly, but yeah, really proud of the end result. Right.
Well, it's understandable, because there are things that I've worked on too that have been like, oh man, this just isn't this isn't as good as the original. We need to go back. We need to rip this OG feature out and bring it in. But totally get it. Yeah. And on the still going on the train of favorites, when you worked on LittleBigPlanet 1, did you have like a favorite level, a favorite DLC?
Good question. I mean, I really enjoyed the challenge of doing the water sounds for the pirates DLC. I still think that's some of the best sounding water that there is in a game. I've not listened to it for a while, so it might not stand up as good as my rose tinted sort of headphones would make it sound in my mind's ear. But there was just a lot of. The nice thing about that was it was. I think that was from memory. That was or was Metal Gear Solid the first DLC we did? I think it might have been. I actually enjoyed those first couple of DLC packs because the intensity, the pace of development had just slowed a bit because we'd shipped the game and that was pretty frantic. So the DLC was we were just tired and had just changed gears down a little bit so it wasn't quite as full on, and so it was leisurely is not the the right word. It's not really the media molecule way certainly not at the time anyway. And yeah, I remember just being able to have the time to actually do a really nice job. And I remember recording a bunch of sounds in my bathtub at home for the water sounds and all this, and just a little bit of iteration. And I remember, I can't remember I've got this memory in my head that I'm trying to catch hold of, but I remember a conversation with Anton Kurtzenau, who's one of the graphics programmers, alongside Alex Evans, and he'd written the code for the water simulation. I guess it's that's really the surface water, right? Because below it's just some blue stuff, but so it's the top of the water. And so I had set the system up to sound great, but and it was driven by this parameter, which was basically how much movement is there on the surface of the water, and it really didn't sound it's not it didn't sound good, it just didn't do much. And I was like, Anton, the water's going crazy and all I'm hearing is what's that? And Anton was a man of few words, so he was just he was just thinking, looking at it, and he goes, and he realized that the way he'd coded it, I guess to be really optimal, he actually only did 50% of the scene, and the other side of it was a mirror image. But to make it not look like a mirror, it was out of phase or something like that. So mathematically adding the left side of the screen and the right side of the screen cancel each other out. So the parameter was basically passing through next to nothing, other than obviously at that, he'd done some stuff to maybe mask the fact that it was mirrored in the middle or at the end. So there was a little bit of data coming through, enough for the system to trigger. But he realized that he was summing to zero basically, and that's why it looked busy, but the sound wasn't doing much. And he made a little tweak to his code, and then all of a sudden it sounded fucking amazing. And I was just like, yes! And it's those little funny moments that you remember, because I just it's just nice. Like I say, I'm not a programmer, but I could appreciate that what he'd done was really clever. And all these things, it's a recurring phenomenon where quite often sound will reveal things about code that aren't necessarily apparent from the way it might behave or look. But the sound, because it's tied into the code in some way that nothing else is tied into it in exactly the same way, the sound can sort of reveal things that are going on in the code. And that was just a little random example of the sound was revealing that the code was not necessarily doing what you would expect, even though it was doing exactly what it was designed to do. And I love that shit. I love it. Those little moments in game development where you as a non-coder being exposed to someone else's work and sort of understanding what it is that they've done, but obviously not on the lowest, most basic level compared to the amazing math genius that's actually made this stuff happen. And those I've always felt quite privileged to sort of get to see that stuff getting done, because that's the stuff that I think your average consumer doesn't really have much of a sense about how games are made. And so to sort of be it's like a peek behind the curtain, really, for someone who doesn't really understand that either, but is a little bit more exposed to it just through the nature of working in house at game studios.
Right, right. Wow, that's wonderful. And for me, I absolutely love that stuff too. You know, the whole water simulation tying in with the sound, because I remember having to write water simulation code before, and with surface integrals and everything, and it was it was a trip getting it to work. But you know, it is true. You see these things come through, and it's really neat when it all comes together and it just works, and then it just sounds amazing. And going on that track, would you be able to give kind of our audience a little bit of a simplified explanation? Because I'm sure a lot of people are interested in this too, into how the whole thing with Fmod ended up working with the interactive music. Like, how did the interactive music end up getting programmed in with all the stems and everything layered on top of each other?
So I can't remember the exact numbers, but Fmod only supported it must be either 6 or 8. And I want to say 8 because that's equivalent to 7.1 for surround sound.
Yeah.
But then it might actually just be 6. But certainly how we ended up configuring it was... But basically, so as you know, the interactive tracks have 6 stems. And so that's 6 stereo stems, so that is 12 tracks. Even though you maybe only think of them as 6, it's actually 12 mono channels, effectively. We structured that as 2 interleaved 6-channel files. And we had to do that because it didn't support 12. You couldn't just have 12 channels in one file. It wasn't supported.
Yeah.
So even though it might have supported 8, and it might not have, I can't remember the specifics, we went with 2 times 6 because that's just like balanced. And there is a bug which is fairly rare, although anyone who's played a lot of LittleBigPlanet will probably encounter it at some point, where the 2 6-channel files can get a little bit out of sync, and so there are times where you might hear some stems that aren't aligned, but you'll only ever notice it if it just so happens to be one of the 3 stereo stems from one half of the track, and then the 3 other stereo stems from the other half. If they are a little bit out of sync for whatever reason, it must be like a bug where if the thread stalls, it loses sync or something like that. I don't know. I can't remember the specifics. But it was. I remember hearing that before we shipped the game, and it was one of those ones where it was just really hard to track down, and only happened if the CPU was getting absolutely thrashed in a level where the frame rate was dropping and stuff. And like in that regard, like once a level's that kind of messed up, doesn't really matter if the audio's screwed because it's visually screwed as well. So it's one of those things where I think we just made it a sort of a decision to, like, because we couldn't fix it.
Right.
It was something in an underlying Fmod code that we didn't have the ability to address. Aesthetically, the reason we did that was just to give people the ability to tweak the mix, to change the vibe of the music throughout the level.
Right.
That's also why I can't remember what we did in LBP 2, but in LBP 1, remember we made a decision to not hide the music objects in levels so that people could see how I had implemented the music to help people to understand how to do what I'd done, basically, with the changes in the mix as you play through the levels. Because with them hidden, the music would change, but when people are playing the game, they might not notice the music has changed because they're busy playing the game rather than oh, the music's changed. That's not necessarily how people think when they're playing through a game. They're just like enjoying playing the game, and rather than analyzing what the music's up to. So by having the sound objects be visible as you play through the game, that was done as like an educational thing,
right?
To be like, this is where I'm changing the music. I'm doing it here. So that was like an overt decision to do that, because there was a point where we had hidden all the music objects, and visually that's better, right?
Right.
but I was keen to, like teach people, reveal how I'd done that. And there was other decisions like that made. I can't remember any other examples, but little things where we decided not to hide something and show it so that people could actually sort of see, oh, that's how they've done that and all this. Which is interesting because I'm pretty sure we probably did away with that in LBP2, because at that point you kind of feel like, oh, the community knows how this stuff works now, so we'll just do something that actually looks and plays great, and people can work it out for themselves. That's from a technical point of view. There's
Right.
other things to talk about in terms of actually writing the tracks. It was something that was a little bit difficult for Matt, because I don't think Matt had worked in a game before, and if he had, it certainly didn't involve much in the way of interactivity, which isn't that surprising. Like, interactivity is still not, it's not used as much as one might think, because it's a bunch more work. So you really need to have a passion for that, and the people you're working with, like speaking with, if I put my like freelance composer hat on, the people you're working with need to be into you doing that too, because sometimes the composer might have the skills and experience and the desire to make a soundtrack more interactive, but if the client's not prepared to pay you more money because it's going to take you more time, then it's not going to happen. So it's not as simple as just because the technology exists to do it doesn't mean you get to do it. There's a complex relationship between those two things there. But LittleBigPlanet, it's to make it. It was the most accessible way that I could think of to allow consumers to, and that's quite a marketing speak thing, but like I mean it thinking about, well, this is a mass market game. We want people to be able to tweak the music. I would have loved it to had like a music sequencer in the first game, but there just wasn't the time for that, so we kept it simple. And this was the easiest way I could think of to allow people to customize the music to some degree. The challenge for Matt with that was because in some ways this is the simplest interactive music system you can imagine. It's simply volume sliders, right? So you bring something in, you bring it out. I think that the challenge for Matt was him getting his head around me saying things to him like, okay, so the end user can tweak the mix at any point. You're not in control of the mix. They are.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult thing to get your head around, because of course there's the levels that we're making, and that's the kind of stuff that Matt could see. But what I was talking about was a hypothetical situation in the future where someone is making a level that's not any of these levels. It's a level that they've made, and they can do whatever the hell they like. And they might, take the drums out at any given moment or bring them in at any given moment. And what that means is, effectively, that stem has always got to have content on it. It's got to have drums on it. So, because there's nothing worse than you bring the drums slider up and there's no drums, because there just so happen to be a break percussion part at that point.
Right.
So there's a relationship between how the interactivity works and how you have to write the track. And that's not how people write music. And it's also worth pointing out that the LittleBigPlanet music was very okay. So it loops, but these were tracks, right? They had a beginning, a middle, and an end. It just happened that the end then led back into the beginning, and it looped seamlessly. So from Matt's point of view, as someone who was an experienced composer and music producer, he was writing these and conceiving of these as tracks, as if they would be a track on an album, really, knowing that we'd have to make them loop, but like fundamentally it was a beginning, a middle, and an end, verse, chorus, middle, eight, all that kind of pop structure type stuff. And so he was writing parts that would come in and out, and then he'd deliver them to me in a stem format, and I'd be like, okay, so like this is a great, the Gardens, for example, the amazing flute solo in there. The beginning of the track didn't have any flute, so it's like we've got the flute on a separate stem and people can bring it in and bring it out, but at the beginning of the track you can move that volume slide up and down and it doesn't do anything. So that feels like a bug, right, to the end user who's like moving a volume slider that doesn't do anything. That just doesn't work. That's a really bad user experience. So
right,
that is one of the reasons why I started to get my hands dirty on Matt's tracks. It was me, one of the easiest ways for me to explain to him what I needed the tracks to do was for me to just do it and be like, because I would ask him and he wouldn't necessarily be able to get his head around it. So I'd be like, no, like this. So like I added, you know, that there's a recorder part at the beginning of the Gardens track. The do 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 do, that bit. That's a recorder part that I put in there on the flute stem to fill a hole. Right, there was a hole there, and I filled it, and that's kind of was the beginning of me. Apologies to Matt, because it's nothing worse than someone else getting their hands on your shit and messing around with it. But it was just, you know, it was an efficient way of solving that problem. And so there's that like content issue, and then there's one other thing that I was thinking of but it escapes me now. Oh, the busyness. So the other aspect of it, so it's like another aesthetic thing, which is that conversely, people might only bring up one stem. So each of the stems is considered in these like multiple vectors where you're thinking about, okay, so it needs to have content on it. It doesn't need to be the same instrument all the way through, right? But it needs to have something on it so it doesn't feel broken when you're bringing the sliders up and down.
Right.
But if any one of the stems should work with any of the other stems. So any pair of stems, if the stems need to work on their own and be interesting in some way and serve a purpose, but any two stems need to work with each other. And when you bring it in, ideally, it sounds different, or you can notice that the other stems come in. So there was a bit of experimentation on my part where what I actually got from Matt was actually more stems than what you're hearing in the game. But I was experimenting with, well, what combination of different content on different stems is going to work? Some of it's about organizing it by instrument type, so like lead or like melody, harmony, rhythm. Just often there's drums, and then there's bass separately, and then there's a rhythm part, and then a melody part, and then what I always thought of as like an alt, which is like maybe it's another of the rhythm instruments, or maybe it's another harmonic instrument, or maybe it's a alto part that's in parallel with the lead, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Think about ways to split them out. And then the other thing is that, and again, very difficult for Matt to get his head around, because it's just the opposite of what he was used to doing. If you play all 6 stems together, it should sound a bit busy, and like there's just a little bit too much going on. So we kind of want the tracks to be what I would call overwritten. And that's very hard for composers who aren't used to doing that and writing interactive music to get their head around. It shouldn't sound bad. It should just sound a little bit busy, and a bit busier than you as like the author of the work, busier than you might intend for it to be. And that's because that goes back to that problem of working out, if you've got a stem on its own, or you've got 2 stems together, they need to have enough going on to be able to hear there's a difference. And if you times that by 6, you just end up with a bit too much stuff. So there's some very subtle, aesthetic choices there in order to get those to be as useful as possible to people. And the big upside of that was when I came to work on LittleBigPlanet 2, having been through that process with Matt, I was able to give a much better, very clear and concise brief to all the other composers that I worked with in LittleBigPlanet 2 about what I needed to do and why, and to give examples. And so, that process in LittleBigPlanet 2 was much smoother as a result of learning what worked and what didn't on LittleBigPlanet 1. So that's a little bit of insight into the creative sort of direction and the functionality of that stuff for you.
Right. Yeah, it's great to have both the technical and creative sides. So I have a few last, much simpler questions for you here. I think it's good to mix it up a bit, ask some fairly complex ones, and then ones that are like this one, for example. What's your favorite character in the series? If you played 3, is it Oddsock, Toggle, Swoop, or Sackboy?
Yeah, not those guys. Sorry, no, no offense, but I wasn't a massive fan of those. And it wasn't even the character design so much as just the awkwardness of sharing the stage with Sackboy or Girl. That didn't quite click for me. So in LittleBigPlanet 2, it'd have to be Clive Hanforth. He's an odd sock, if you think about it. He's just a very strange character, and I love that about him. Also, he was voiced by Barry, who is Siobhan's partner. And so unlike all the other stuff which we recorded in a professional studio in London in Soho, I recorded Barry in my room in the toilet shop, I think it was. Actually, that might have been in the new office at that point. I can't actually remember. But yeah, it was Barry, and Barry's a pal, so it's just I've got it's just funny, someone
Yeah.
and then Barry's not, even though he's not a professional voice actor, he has over the years done voice acting in numerous games just as a result of someone who's been working in games for since the early 90s, I think. So
Wow.
he's been around a while. And I remember one day I was at Side UK, which is the recording studio we used, voice production place we used in London for the LittleBigPlanet games, where we recorded Stephen Fry and all that. And I can't remember why I was there, but I was there. And I think this is maybe. Oh no, it was when I was recording for Tearaway, probably. And I was inside, and then Barry walks in, and I'm like, Barry, what are you doing here? And he's like, oh, I'm recording Clive for LBP3. And I just remember, and he was getting paid.
Oh my goodness.
He was not paid for his work on Clive Hanforth and LittleBigPlanet 2. That was all that I'm aware of. Yeah. So yeah, I've got fond memory of that. I quite enjoyed Da Vinci in LBP2 as well. I just liked that there was this doddery old man. Yeah, it was fun. So they're my favorite two characters from 2. In the first game, probably. So I think. So I did a lot of the gibberish in both games. Some of them are like abstract sound kind of music concrete style, but like some of them are vocalizations, and it's mainly me. If they're not if they're not like animals or whatever. And I think some of the first ones I did were the king and the queen in the gardens, and that's where I kind of came up with some of the like, gibberish techniques. And so I've got a soft spot for them because they're it was just like an early like happy creative memory of like making something for the game. And I'm tempted to give you a little demo, but I remember with the king, it's like one of my voices. It's the like, let me channel the king. It's like there's a lot of ooh, ah type stuff, and then
wow,
and laughing, lots of and
right.
like there's that, and then with the queen, I remember I was basically doing a really bad impersonation of the queen. So it's like more of that nasal sound kind of thing going on, and I can't remember what she says. Oh yeah, there's so many ridiculous stories. There's a video on my YouTube channel where I think it's publicly shared. It's a video I made for after we did sorry, my brain's all over the place at this moment. I'm trying to work out how to explain this. On LittleBigPlanet 2, we had the cutscenes, and those were voiced. But then, this is just me being a pedant. Like, I insisted that we couldn't have spoken word on top of the speech bubbles in the game. Because my whole thing was like, look, if you're going to add voice to the cutscenes, that's great. I'm down with that. The thing that I'm not okay with is if we had voiced all the speech bubbles in LittleBigPlanet 1, we would have ruined the game, because every time you like die and restart, those get re-triggered, and like there's nothing worse than a game where you die and every time you respawn, you get the same bit of dialogue over and over and over. And I was like, I don't care how we solve that, but that needs to be solved. So like, whatever ideas you've got, great, but if you can't solve that and you're not prepared to put time into thinking about how to make that a good player experience, then I'm going to insist that we don't have those spoken and we have them be gibberish, so that at least it will be less sort of present, and it won't be the same line of dialogue every time it re-triggers and all this. So there was like, I can't remember the conversations or what other people were making of all this, but this is my memory of things. And so we ended up in this, even at the time it was ridiculous, and I knew it was ridiculous, but we ended up in this weird place where we had spoken dialogue in the cutscenes, but we had gibberish during gameplay. And there was probably other reasons for it too. I can't remember if there was budgetary reasons or what it was, but like we agreed that this is what we were going to do. But then it created this ridiculous situation where, because the spoken lines had to be localized, and so we'd created this accidental corner we'd backed ourselves into, where that therefore meant that all of the gibberish had to get localized too, because otherwise you'd have one actor speaking in French and then the English language actor in the gibberish, and it would clash. So I had to put together like a little training Bible on how to do gibberish for all the localization agencies. So all the gibberish is localized in LittleBigPlanet 2, which is actually really cool, but also just ridiculous. And all of the stuff that I'd done and learned, again, a bit like, how writing music for LittleBigPlanet 2 was, or interactive music for LBP2 was a bit easier because I'd been through and worked through a lot of the problems in LittleBigPlanet 1. With the gibberish, I'd done most of it myself. So I basically had to formalize and write up a Bible of how to create gibberish in the LittleBigPlanet style for all the localizations agencies for LittleBigPlanet 2. And one of the techniques I have is I actually write a script for the characters to speak, but then you kind of mumble. I hate the word mumble because it's not really accurate of what you do, but it's really important that you're not just making random sounds, because that doesn't come across as speech or communication. So having a sentence to read, it gives you a shape to perform, and you can perform the the shape of the sentence. And so there are, if in that video that I've got on my YouTube channel, there's a moment where I've got the actual script that the voice actor, I think it's Da Vinci, is performing, and so you can kind of read what he's reading in his mind, and then you can hear how he's turning it into gibberish, which is so cool. And he was actually the best out of all the actors. The reason that why he's in that example, I think Robbie Stevens, the actor's name was, he's you can hear how the sounds he's making match the shape of the sentences he's reading, but they're not the words that he's reading. And that's a technique I developed for LittleBigPlanet 1. And there's one particular moment in the loop for the Queen where she's saying cucumber sandwiches, because apparently that's what the Queen, you can, if you go to obviously she's dead now, I don't know if you still do this, or if it was her preference, but cucumber sandwiches is this stereotype of what you would get at the Queen's garden party, and with the crusts cut off. It's very random, but so there's a moment where the Queen goes cucumber sandwiches or something, and if you know that it's in there, then you can kind of hear it, but otherwise it just kind of sounds like yeah. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, I've got a bit of a soft spot for the King and Queen in the gardens, even though they're a little bit annoying.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I do too. I remember when I first started playing in the gardens, I'm like, this makes no sense, but this sounds great. Tell me more. So what's interesting, so you talked about wanting to, use gibberish instead of spoken lines and all that. And of course the gibberish, I assume in the game is kind of a, when you go up to the characters every single time, it's a bit different, right? The gibberish.
Yeah, there's a random start point on the file, which is it's an interactive audio sort of technique to avoid repetition. Also, when you've got multiple, this isn't a gibberish thing, it's more just an interactive audio implementation technique, but when you've got the same prefab of the same object in the environment, when they trigger at the same time, if it's got a looping sound in it and you don't put a random start point on it, those will phase, because they're often triggered maybe one frame apart from each other, and it just sounds really weird. So random start points are it's a very It's like 101 interactive audio thing, but you still hear in a lot of games where clearly people didn't learn that,
Right.
or aren't using their ears to solve that problem. But yeah, so it's a random start point in the gibberish. But no, let me get this right. It could be. I might have done something more clever. There's certain, you know how in the music tracks there's like, I think it's if you use the D-pad rather than the analog stick, it will jump to certain points in the track.
Yeah.
Those are like little markers that I've placed down in there as like places that I think would be useful places to start the track at if it starts playing from that point. If you like trigger a new music object. So like the D-pad gives you like the beginning of each like section in the music or whatever, just because it's like it's a lot easier for you to flick through those with the D-pad than it is you to like try and fine tune and get those points with the analog stick. I might have done something clever with the gibberish where there's markers in there too to have those start like not halfway through words. I can't remember. I might be making that up, but it sounds like a good idea. If I didn't do that, I should have. Yeah, I can't remember. But I've got a vague memory of doing something like that, so that might be true.
Right. And so what I wanted to ask specifically is the whole random sort of marker generation thing. This gets into AI a little bit. You see a lot of new games and a lot of just this talk about using AI nowadays, specifically with audio, to generate voice lines or to generate like music, right? So I wanted to know, do you think that will like become a common staple in games, or do you think,
I like, yeah, I mean, I don't really see why not. The issue with AI at the moment is not the tech, although obviously it's moving at a lightning pace. It's amazing to see how it progresses so quickly. The issue is just what it's been trained on, and the big question now is, it's not even a question. The big issue is the scraping of data and copyright infringement. But if we ignore that and just look at the technology and what it's capable of, yeah, if you were to train on a proprietary data set and use that to generate music in real time or whatever is being generated in real time, there's no reason why, if it sounded good enough, that's not something that games should be doing. And for speech, I think it's super interesting. The challenge there is obviously to do with performance and whether the AI model is capable of giving you great performances. There's no question it can create from text a realistic sounding performance. The sound quality is not there. The high end, I've not heard a single voice model that's got good sibilance. I don't know why that is, because I don't know how the tech works, but there's I think because this stuff's computationally expensive, there's a lot of shortcuts taken in order to make it just render more efficiently, and that has consequences for the sound quality, and that's all solvable. But like, yeah, I think the performance side of it is the interesting one, because once you get into beyond just someone doing that whole like reading you some text out loud, like you can have Bill Clinton read you a whatever it is that you want to type out. You'll have it come back. Anyone who's done an audiobook can now be like instantly turned into an AI model, basically.
Right.
But that's a very specific kind of performance, which is therefore very easy to replicate because it's a specific kind of thing. Whereas acting is a bit different, and I'm sure it'll get there eventually. But like, the issue for me is more, what new sort of game player experiences does that tech open up? Because just replacing voice actors isn't interesting. Like, that's just trying to save money. That's not a new experience. If anything, that can only probably be inferior to a human, really, for for the next few years at least anyway. What is more interesting is what new experiences can you make if you effectively have a text-based dialogue system that is then brought to life in real time through AI voice performances. And I don't know what that is, but like that's a game design challenge for someone to work with that to come up with a kind of new gameplay experience that currently is only possible with text. But if you all of a sudden can have that brought to life through visual and oral performance that's generated in real time, that could be a real game changer. And that's, there's like a new possibility space there. And that's interesting. I find that interesting. Like, what is that going to be? And that's a lot more interesting to me than, just like doing stuff on the cheap with AI rather than using humans, which
right.
There's an advantage to that, but it's purely financial. It's not about making the game better
right.
or more interesting. Whereas the design side of it is the interesting thing, and that is where AI starts to become justifiable and giving people new kinds of experiences. That's got to be the thing that makes it acceptable. It's not just going to be saving money.
Right.
I'm sure, I know that there's reasons for that, and some people are interested in that, especially if there are people who are spending the money. I completely get it, but as a creative, that's not inspiring or interesting to me in the slightest.
Right. Because if the sound quality would have, at a certain point gets to near 100%, I was going to say maybe if Media Molecule decided to remake LittleBigPlanet and keep the gibberish idea, could have used a model to generate that gibberish.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a good example. Perhaps with the gibberish, it's a funny one. Like it's an aesthetic thing in many ways, because I tended to have like two different gibberish performances. One which was like, I don't know, I can't even remember what they were, but like just two different ones. Maybe for LittleBigPlanet 2, I remember having one that was like a certain, based on the script and the content of the story and the kind of lines that, say, Da Vinci has, he has like two different gibberish voices. One that's more like effusive and happy, and then one that's a little bit more like conspiratorial and like whispered and to have more would have been great, right? But it was a lot of work to create that those gibberish and get those different performances and to have them consistent. And it's a bunch of work. If we could have had an AI model that would like just give us more, which is definitely doable, that would be cool. That's something we would have looked at.
And here's a little bit of a different question. This more so deals with YouTube stuff. I'm not sure if you watch any of these channels, but do you watch or have you watched our channel, the A channel? Have you watched Epic LBP Time?
No, I mean I might have done it and been unaware of it, because there's times when I'll click on a random link in Twitter and like watch a video, but it's not like I'm subscribed.
Have you heard of XY Clan Killer, Nerdy Ant, 8-Bit Theater, any of those channels at all?
Don't think so.
Not at all. Well, it's funny because little tiny story. It turns out when I think it was at Sumo Digital for LittleBigPlanet 3, there was apparently a board. There was a board meeting. Actually, it wasn't for LittleBigPlanet 3. It's Sackboy Big Adventure. There was a board meeting during the launch where they were all in this room. Steven, Isabel, David Dino, I think, and a few others on that team.
Is a name from the past.
And it's funny because I'm actually going to be interviewing him tomorrow as well. So that's going to be,
say hello.
Or actually, for a while. Next week on Thursday. Yeah, I sure will. And they were apparently watching a live stream from this guy named Cruz, who was on our channel at the time, and they were just watching us like play Sackboy Big Adventure in the room and going, "Oh my goodness, look at that! Look at what he's doing." And gosh, that's such a great memory, because everyone who was, you know, all the big people at Sumo Digital have watched our channel, so it was
Awesome.
really cool to hear about that. So super cool. And let's see here. So this is a very simple one. It's kind of more of an opinionated question. Astrobot or Sackboy?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking the thought I was actually having was sort of relates back to Twitter thread based off some comments from Stephen Isbell about a month ago, where he had he tagged me in one of his replies. I think there was a Sackboy featured in a cutscene in some game. No idea what it was, but he'd given Sackboy a voice, and he was like, he tagged me and saying like, oh yeah, I think at KCM Young was the original voice of Sackboy, and and so yeah, I sort of typed out a bunch of the thinking behind why Sackboy doesn't have a voice, and how giving them a voice is just like stupid and doesn't really fit with LittleBigPlanet fans' sort of relationship with their character, and and in a weird sort of way, like, if when you say Sackboy, we're talking about Sackboy from and girl, Sack person, Sack folk, whatever flavor your Sack person was. If we're talking about that character from LittleBigPlanet 1 and 2, then if that's what we mean by Sackboy, then I would pick that character over Astrobot. I've got a much bigger, stronger relationship with Sackboy than I do with Astrobot. If we're talking about Sackboy in the whole, with every other game they've been in and things like that, where the character and the IP is starting to sort of change and fall apart a little bit, then I'll pick Astrobot, because that character has retained its like original form thus far. Who knows what games Team Asobi are going to make in the future? I'm sure every IP at some point becomes tired, right? It happens to everything, and then but also they can then get rejuvenated and have a second life. So like, you know, there's no need to be like totally pessimistic about it. But yeah, it depends on what side of bed I get out in the morning as to which one I would pick. But that's kind of how I feel about it. And that's why it's a difficult question to answer, because it's not straightforward.
But what do you think, because going off of the, you know, whole pessimistic idea and an IP becoming tired, right? This is actually a perfect question to ask. What do you think about the shutdown of the LittleBigPlanet servers?
I mean, yeah, it was just really sad. I mean, obviously I moved on, and Media Milk had moved on from LittleBigPlanet a long time ago, so in some ways it was actually, for me, it was similar to like London studio closing. You know, this year's been terrible for people getting laid off and for studio closures, just with the current for a bunch of reasons, right? That's happening. But when it's a studio you worked at that get closed, it's like it cuts different. And I was surprised how that affected me, London studio closing, because it just brought back a lot of memories of that time in that place. On the one hand, it's inevitable, of course, like it was never going to be kept up by Sony like forever. So there's that. But then actually the main issue for me is not that it was turned off, it's the way it was done, and the way it was like, oh, it'll be back online soon, and it's like, we've just decided not to. I thought that was really shitty, and I think they really fucked up there. And that's the worst bit. That bit is the worst bit. Like, turning off is bad. I wish it was still up there for the people that were still using it, but I can understand why it had to happen at some point. So in that regard, it's a bit like, you know, everyone dies. You don't know when, but it's going to happen. So it's an inevitability, and in that regard, I'm kind of fine. I'm at peace with that. But the way it was done was not good. There's not much more to be said about that. I think it could and more importantly should have been done a lot better. All assumption on my part assumed what happened there was they looked into, you know, getting it back online, and it was maybe more work than they'd realized it would be. And they just decided that it wasn't worth doing. So it's not like it was done on purpose. Like, it wasn't malevolent. No one was thinking, how can we be as cruel as possible here? And yet, I think, yeah, it's just such a shame that that's how it happened. It's like a horrible car crash that LittleBigPlanet has died in, rather than a nice peaceful, like, you know, fell asleep and then didn't wake up would have been what you would have wished for anyone
Right.
you care about. So it's more, yeah, it's the nature of the death rather than the death itself. That's my analogy.
Right. No, it's a perfect one, a sad one for sure.
And again, gallows humor is important. It's important that we can laugh about it.
Right, because
it is sad.
it is, and ever since the official server shut down, we on the channel, since I'm of course a programmer developer, we were hard at work over the past few months building our own private server for the channel, and getting that up and running. We did a couple of streams recently where we were able to archive all of the levels, all 10 million levels. And we were just playing them on the stream. People were coming in and chatting and saying, "Oh, how are you playing these?" And, you know, just reliving memories. And we're still planning on continuing to do these streams because, you know, the servers aren't coming back. But, you know, we have, there are plenty of, right. So there's plenty of options out there. And so this is talking about consoles. What was your favorite console, if you had a favorite?
Do you mean to work on?
Just in I suppose in general, it could be to have worked on, to have
as a player. I could have divided a line between the two, so I'll answer both questions. But as a player, I've always been more of a PC gamer than a console gamer, or at least at the point in my life where I was doing a lot more gaming, which was before I had kids. And my first really got into gaming through being a PC gamer in the 90s. So the Windows 9, the DOS, Windows 95, Windows 98 sort of ecosystem, sort of before your time, but like that's my happy sort of place. That's as difficult as it was to get a game to run in those days, it was all part of that sort of what felt like the bleeding edge of a new entertainment medium, and I just loved tinkering and doing digital media creation on PCs and playing games. And yeah, so that's very much part of what led to me wanting to make games, was that whole experience in the 90s as a teenager. And I didn't have any I didn't get a PC till I was like, what age would it have been? It would be like 1994, 1993. I think it was Christmas 1993. Got a PC. So I would have been, just turned 13 when I got my first computer. And I didn't have a console prior to that, other than a hand-me-down from a cousin, Philips Magnavox Odyssey 2, which in North America was the Magnavox Odyssey. So in Europe it was Philips Odyssey. Philips Video Pack 2 it was called in Europe, and it was the Magnavox Odyssey 2. Yeah. In North America, which was, so the first home console was the Magnavox Odyssey, created by Ralph Bauer, can't remember. And this was the follow-up. So I had one of those, and I only had two games for it. One was a Pac-Man ripoff called KC Munchkin, and another one was a two-player kind of thing called Space Wars, where you just like shot rocket ships, shot at each other. And that was the only console I had growing up, other than getting to play on friends' Master Systems, NESs, C64s, the occasional BBC Micro for anyone who was a little bit more middle class might have had one of those. So I wasn't really a console gamer. I didn't have a PlayStation 1 or a Nintendo or Sega console when I was growing up. So I've never really considered myself to be a console gamer. But of course, I've got every PlayStation console. I've owned every PlayStation console since the PlayStation 2, but I always got them through work because I worked at Sony and then at Media Molecule, which then got bought by Sony. So I've got every Sony console. I've subsequently bought a PlayStation 1 just for retro shenanigans. I've actually got a dream to, so random aside, as far as I can tell, there's a digital audio input on the expansion port on a PlayStation 1, which never got used by anything. And it's not in SBDIF format, it's in L2S, which is like a chip-to-chip digital audio serial communication protocol.
Yeah.
And so I've got this fantasy of turning a PlayStation 1 into a real-time reverb unit. Just like, and I'm not a programmer or like a hardware hacker, so the chances of me being able to pull this off are pretty much zero. But I do love the idea of doing that. It's never going to happen, but it's on my bucket list. I would love to do that. I developed a little bit of a, because I like I say, I got into the industry during the PlayStation 2 era, and the PlayStation 2 audio system is effectively just two PlayStation 1 audio systems bolted together. It's got double the number of channels. The only difference is the PS2 is at 48K, the PS1 was at 44.1. But otherwise, they're identical. So even though I didn't work on PlayStation 1, I know how it works. I know what it sounds like because the PS2 is very similar. And I do have a weird, I wouldn't say it's like nostalgia because things sound fucking shitty and it was bollock to work on. But at the same time, like that's a very specific sound. And I've got knowledge of why those games sound the way they do. And there is, the 90s are kind of coming back in a little bit. And you're starting to see some indie games that are quite overtly like PlayStation 1 and PS2 inspired on visually. And yeah, I'm massively, like you can hear it in my LittleBigPlanet was the thing that kind of got me into it, but you hear it in my Astrobot work too. I'm really into retro aesthetics and retro sound aesthetics. So there's a lot of like attempt to make stuff sound old and dirty and grimy. And you know, LittleBigPlanet with its handmade aesthetic really called for that. But I still do that in my work now. I love all that shit. So being into this idea of like messing around on PlayStation 1s and yeah, there's various like little side projects and personal projects I'd love to do involving retro gaming sound hardware. Like I'd love to do an album where it's like every track's done on a different console, just as like a, you know, journey through time of game audio history, but also then the creative challenge of trying to get those old bits of hardware to actually sound good and all that stuff. So yeah, don't know why I'm talking about that. It's just sort of vague because you started asking me about what's your favorite console. I think I don't really know the answer to that. I'll because it's not, like I say, I kind of have love-hate relationship with the PlayStation 2. I never had a PlayStation 1, even though I want to sort of do things with it. So yeah, I would say annoyingly PC is my favorite. But old Windows 95, 98 gaming PC is my that's my happy place. So I know it's not a console, but that's what makes me nostalgic.
Right. And that's what matters ultimately, right? And
absolutely.
So it's for me, PC. I'm a PC guy. I've also been a PlayStation guy my whole life. I've always had a grudge against Xbox. Sorry about you Xbox lovers. I have just never connected to it on a deep level. It's just like all the most entertaining games I've played. I mean, I've played on Xboxes at friends' houses before, right? But this was years ago. This was like 6-7 years ago. And, it's just different because games like Ark, for example, they're cool, but it's mostly action-adventure games. I am much more with you on the front of platformer games, of, just kind of family-friendly games. I'm definitely on that front. And so PlayStation has always just kind of been the one for me. It's just hits a sweet spot, the PS3 especially. I mean, playing some PS2 games here and there, like Shrek 2, for example, or what was it, Crash Bandicoot Twinsanity. Oh, that was an amazing game. I missed that a lot.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff. It's mad.
Right. It's a bit of a silly question, but I think it's one that anyone needs to be asked. Which is better, Coke or Pepsi?
I mean, Pepsi's always. I mean, I'm not a fan of either drink, I should say.
Right.
But back when I used to drink it more when I was younger, Coke always just tasted slightly less. I know it's a ridiculous thing to say, but Pepsi just tastes a bit more manufactured. Somehow.
Well, that's fair. I will have to say, I can't pick a favorite. In fact, I've had times where I mix both together like a witch with a cauldron.
Whoa.
You know, at a restaurants or whatever
definitely
here.
Witchy. It's definitely witchy. It's pagan.
Well, it's been great having you on, Mr. Young, of course, and you've done so many great things over the years. A lot of important work for the Little Big Planet community, and of course the Little Big Planet games. You know, from being a sound director to a composer, you've worn many different hats, and I'd imagine there have been good times and bad times, but it's all been worth it because you've impacted millions of lives. I know you've impacted mine, and it's been great.
Well, that's the thing. When we were working on the game, when you're working on any game, you hope that it's going to find an audience, and you hope that people are going to play it. And yeah, we made Little Big Planet with the hope that people would make stuff in it, and the whole thing was so much bigger than. It's not like, well, I certainly speak for myself. I didn't have any expectation about what was going to happen. I knew there was a lot of buzz about the game, but you don't really know how it's going to go down until it all happens. So the fact that so many people did play it and it's meant so much to so many people is amazing. And so yeah, thanks for everyone who played, and I hope it stays in a special place in your heart for the rest of your life.
And yeah, I'm sure it will. I'm sure we'll keep seeing glimpses of Little Big Planet moving forward. You know, even though the servers are gone, there's still private ones out there. There's still a community behind this game, even after almost, like, we're coming up on 3 out of 20 years. 17, 16 years. Yeah. It
makes me feel very old.
All right. Well, that was Kenneth Young, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll catch you next time here on the channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys later. Again, thank you so much for coming on the channel to do this interview with us. I'm sure it was very insightful for a lot of you guys out there. All right. Peace.